So, with that, I'd like to introduce Jumana Aboduela, if I pronounced that correctly, I hope so, to introduce the theme for this last session.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Sean and Lizzie, for this wonderful opportunity. And I'm excited to introduce the third and last panel of the evening. On 125th Street. For decades, 125th Street has often been referred to as the heart and soul of Harlem. As goes the heart, goes the soul, and this explains the intrinsic nature of the connection of the two. If 125th Street was and is the heart of Harlem, then what is the state of its soul? 125th Street is the heart of Harlem. For generations, it has been home to countless Black cultural and commercial institutions. And here you see that in the Apollo Theater, which was built in 1913 and has hosted musical legends of jazz, blues, soul, and R&B, as well as a stage for comedy, theater, and dance. And here you see that in Hotel Teresa, which is an architectural landmark that was a social hub for Black Harlemites and celebrities, as well as a home for organizations such as the March on Washington Monument and the Organization for Afro-American Unity, founded by Malcolm X. With a nod towards expanding Harlem's social and economic integration, in December 1966, Governor Rockefeller publicly announced that a site at 125th Street and 7th Avenue in Harlem had been selected as a site for a new 23-story building that would house state government offices. The state acquired the site, which took up the whole block of 125th Street to 126th and Malcolm X Boulevard and Lenox to Adam Clayton Powell and 7th Ave, and demolished the existing buildings. The office building, designed by Infill and Johnson, was to be constructed first, with other community amenities to be considered later. The government's approach in the project faced several challenges, including community opposition. At one point, the site was occupied for 3 months by protesters who demanded a revision to something that more fully addressed the community needs. And here you see that in an article by Ada Louise Huxtable from the New York Times. And this is in the year 1969. For 8 months after the governor's announcement of the selected site, Arch announced their opposition to the project and presented 3 alternative designs completed at the request of Harlem-based organizations. This included housing, cultural facilities, commercial space, and schools. Although all 3 designs have a mix of programming, each plan focuses on a different pressing need, one on housing and daycare, and one on a variety of educational facilities, and the last on office and cultural spaces. And here's the one on education, and the one on offices and cultural organizations. A convention was held in December 1969 where community organizations voted the original state office proposal, an alternative service center proposed by Governor Rockefeller that would house the original state agencies plus additional community services, or an option that called for residents to be able to purchase the land to realize one of ARC's designs. And option 3 won overwhelmingly, but was not the option that went forward. The state office building was built without the expansive cultural component intended to fill up the rest of the block, and opened its doors in 1973. Almost 40 years later, the city proposed a rezoning of 125th Street that would promote investment and growth. Much of Harlem's zoning had been in place since 1961, and the 2000s building, and in the 2000s zoning on 125th primarily allowed a mix of 4 to 6 story mixed-use buildings. This was viewed by many as an invitation to the private sector to engage with Harlem. The city proposed a special district that would allow for an increased density of development, but was intended to ensure the preservation of neighborhood character. Some were concerned that the zoning changes would doom existing small businesses and lead to increased rents, which were already starting to rise. Community organizers estimated that 638 small businesses closed the year after rezoning. Here is the once iconic Eiselben building on 125th Street and Malcolm X. And this is pictured in the 1980s, where many small businesses also occupied at the lower level. It spent many years vacant and wrapped in various advertising. It was demolished and is now home to Harlem's Whole Foods. The historic 125th Street corridor, shown here from the Hudson River to Lexington Ave, reflect its evolution to present day. The corridor has experienced recent growth, including the new headquarters of the National Urban League, the renovation and retrofit of the Victoria Theater, and the Studio Museum expansion, as well as the new Tasty Labs Life Science building, and more following the decades of planning, vision studies, rezoning, and tumultuous economic cycles and new investment. The present and continuing evolution of 125th Street is seen as a transformative collection of new buildings, including arts, educational, housing, and commercial. The speakers that I'm excited to welcome this evening in this panel are invited to reflect on 125th Street's evolution, including its legacy of vision projects and the role of government then and now, and its current engagement with the broader private sector through government-sponsored community investment. Thank you.
This is great. So just to get started, if I can provide just a little bit of context, it'll take a little bit of time. And before we do that, I'd like each of you to provide just a little background on who you are, what you do professionally, what your interests are, how you are particularly suited and knowledgeable of the evolution of 125th Street over, let's say, the past, however long you've been engaged in it. Beatrice, we'll start with you.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Great to be here. Beatrice Siblis. I've been a Harlem resident since 2024. I'm a real estate developer, initially focusing on residential, now with a focus on hospitality and food. I'm Jamaican by origin, which might explain the focus on hospitality and food. Real creative over here. And at the time of the 125th Street rezoning, I served as the chair of the Economic Development Committee of Community Board 10. I think in my first meeting, literally my first meeting as chair of the committee, someone dropped the ULURP for the 125th Street rezoning on the center of the table, and thus it all began. I think the answer that we provided in the rezoning was a focus on development of business. That continues to be my focus on entrepreneurship and small business, and I look forward to share those comments.
Thank you so much. My name is Curtis Archer, Harlem Community Development Corporation. But I really want to first thank Sean. Thank you for inviting me, man. Thank you. I mean, this is my neighborhood, but originally, remember, I'm from the BX, but I've been a Harlemite since 1980. All right, so I've seen all of the changes. I've been at Harlem Community Development Corporation since 2006, and it was for one project, would you believe? The historic Victoria Theater. As a matter of fact, Gargano called me and said, Curtis, you'll do this deal, you can write your ticket. Well, 5 governors later, and I'm above ground, so it's good to see it happen. But my actual career in community development started, I think, under Mayor Dinkins, working for the then New York City Department of Business Services, which is now the Department of Small Business Services. I also worked for Carl Weisbrod at EDC, out in the Rockaways for a number of years before coming back here, and also worked under Deborah Wright when she was at the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. So I've had, you know, when a light bulb goes off in your head, because my training was in sociology and criminal justice. But when I got the job with the Department of Business Services, that's when the light bulb went off. And I said, this is what I want to do. So Beatrice, I've known you and you've done some wonderful projects in the community. So I thank you because I love your engagement of the community in doing that. And I'm really, Mark, I know your stuff, Ken's, so I'm really thrilled just to be a part of this. So I'm going to learn from them, Sean. So take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Norman, Associate Dean at NYU Shack Institute of Real Estate. I moved to New York in '95. I'm not a Harlemite, but in my work here, I started in community development at LISC, which had formed a new organization called the Community Development Trust, which was the first community development REIT, trying to get lending capital and equity into community development projects. And when I started teaching, I realized that in architecture schools, I realized that a lot of architecture students didn't understand the development process. And I'm very happy to follow Kirk because it's complicated in a number of different ways, not just the financing. So my slide up there is blocks and lots, because I actually think that's a really interesting way to think about how development happened in the past and how it goes forward, and particularly in Harlem. And right, like, why does Harlem exist in the form we see it now? Speculation, right? The speculation that the train was going to come, and then not coming fast enough, and then the waves of immigrants and other things. And so I like the complexity of development and then thinking about how we move it forward. The other slide I have is June Jordan and Buckminster Fuller's plan, which I realized was the same year that ARC was created. And what a different vision of Harlem. So I hope we get to some of that too. And just happy to be here.
I don't think this is on. Good afternoon. My name is Ken Knuckles. I am Vice Chair of the New York City Planning Commission, but I've done a few things prior there too. For 15 years, I was President and CEO of the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone Development Corporation, also known as UMEZ, where a lot of our activity, which hopefully we'll get to talk about, was centered along 125th Street. And full disclosure, the rezoning of 2008, I was Vice Chair of the Planning Commission then, voted for it, and have no regrets about what I did then. My background is in public service. I served in I started out my career in city government in 1977 as an attorney. I worked for a number of agencies. In 1985, I went to the Housing and Preservation Development Agency, HPD, and then, and this was a significant point in my career, I went to the Bronx and became Deputy Borough President of the Bronx in 1987, at a point in time when the Bronx had about, I don't know, 40% of the vacant building housing stock in the city. And with Fernando Ferrer, who wanted me to focus on housing since I had just come from HPD, we began to strategize about how to change the identity of the Bronx from being the very essence of urban abandonment into something like urban revitalization, which I think the Bronx is now, some 38 years later. But a lot of work went into that, but we, Freddie always says, we turned the ship around, and I think we did do that. I also served in the administration of David Dinkins. I was Commissioner of General Services. It's called DCAS now, but in those days, we had construction as well as a number of other agencies under us. But let me give you a little anecdote about Arch, which I have a long and determinative relationship with. In 1968, Arch was in the middle of and a leader in the discussion around the renewal of Harlem, and urban renewal was in full force then. And Arch was engaged in a number of fights. Not only the Harlem State Office building, but the ill-advised and ill-fated, fortunately as it turns out, decision of Columbia to build a gymnasium in Morningside Park, the back of which would have been facing Harlem. So Arch was a part of the advocacy that turned that decision by Columbia away. A decision, although unsuccessful, it was a decision that really haunted the relationship of Columbia and Harlem, and haunts it to this day. But Arch, aside from its advocacy and urban renewal involvement, and redefining and expressing on behalf of the community its aspirations around what Harlem would look like. It had a program called Architecture in the Neighborhood, and as a part of that, it had an initiative to get minority students who were then defined, at least in Upper Manhattan, as blacks and Puerto Ricans, into the study of architecture and urban planning. And there were a number of us who enrolled in that program in 1968. I was one of them. And the thrust of the program, which was aided and abetted by the Ford Foundation and AIA, the American Institute of Architects, was to get those of us who were so inclined to study architecture and urban planning. I was one of the students, and through a series of measures and a gauntlet process, I arrived at the University of Michigan in the fall of 1969, and emerged from there with a degree in architecture in 1973, and then I went on to Howard University's law school. So Arch was has played a pivotal role in my life. Max Bond was, in 1968, still the leader of Arch, but he was succeeded by a fellow named Arthur Symes, Art Symes, who is thankfully still with us, but unable to participate in this forum. But Arch has played a meaningful role in this community and a dispositive role in my life.
Great, great. Thank you all. So maybe just to make a connection between the last session, because I thought something quite profound was offered by Mr. Gregory Baggett, and I believe it was he who mentioned this, that he started talking about asset protection and productivity. And maybe just a little quick background outside of my role as the director of the center, but I started growing up in Harlem. Family moved to the Bronx, but I remember Harlem and actually being on 125th Street. My aunt, who was here last evening, was affectionately known as the queen of small business loans on the corner of St. Nicholas and 125th Street at the Chase Bank. And according to her, she offered business loans where she had no business offering them. but the rate of return defaults was so low, and her reputation began to grow, as did the acumen of Harlem along with her assistants. And you can imagine a number of those loans were centered on businesses looking to operate on 125th Street. So I remember that affectionately because she used to babysit, and I would sit right there at the bank desk, or under it, or near it, or try to sneak out and travel up and down the energy of 125th Street. So to me, 125th Street represents a key and pivotal asset, always has, as far as I can recall back. And it wasn't until later that I understood the importance of the resources that are required to advance that asset, and where those resources come from. And when I speak of resources, in this case, I'm thinking of state and city and government resources. And again, as of my own career, and as we've shown here, we see the government's role in bringing in a level of economic activity through the state office building in terms of what they were hoping to accomplish. And then 2008, extraordinarily important moment where social and economic integration is being planned out through the built environment. Again, really profound. And I think the context of all of this, the 70s and 80s, when the city was almost bankrupt. So for me, to kind of paint the picture of, at one period, again, bridging past visions of how you might be able to construct productivity protocols, protection of those assets, passing of the rezoning, present realities. So I'd like to start to see if any of you can offer some reflections on the role of government then versus the role of government now. I believe that we are firmly in the throes of a kind of neoliberal directive where the requirement for where resources come from are now being directed towards the private sector. Maybe some of you, and I know there's vast involvement in history, maybe some reflection of that rezoning, what we're seeing, and was it a necessary move, a vital move to help bring 125th Street to where it is today?
So Ken was talking about that he was on the planning committee and voted yes, and I was on the community board and we voted no with conditions. Remember that?
Yes, but. No, but.
And those conditions were about the fact that in its initial incarnation, the rezoning prioritized residential development in its density bonus for those in the real estate game. Basically, you could build a lot more residential than you could build commercial. And in our feedback, we wanted to preserve 125th Street as Harlem's main street. Because when a community loses its main street, then it is a victim to just becoming hyper-gentrified and just rolled into other communities. I think one of the systemic, from a development perspective, weaknesses that we have in Harlem from the way it is zoned and planned is the limited amount of commercial development. I think the biggest challenge that Harlem has is that there are so few commercial corridors, other than the few east-west corridors, 116, 125th, 135th, where you can have commercial development. And I believe that that is one of the reasons that we have so much high local unemployment. And I think that in that situation, you either can think about rezoning as an incentive for commercial development, because when you have scarce commercial, that allows for the bigger players, the Whole Foods, the Targets, etc., to take the space because no one else can afford it because the space is so scarce. I wanted to point out that while other communities have experienced the vacating of their commercial corridors and their vacating of big box stores, our community is experiencing the opposite. I remember when the lease for Target and Trader Joe's was signed in the middle of COVID. Because unlike other communities on the Upper West Side, where those customers may say rely more on the internet and Amazon global leadership, people in our community still need to go to the store. So one of the things that I would say, and I want to just thank Curtis Archer for being a champion of this, when we saw on the community board that local small businesses would be decimated, we continued to brainstorm, and out of the brainstorming on the Economic Development Committee came up with an organization that some of you may know called Harlem Park to Park, to support local businesses, knowing that local businesses would be displaced from 125th Street, and we would have to support them on locating on the avenues, which were harder to win visibility, and we created a neighborhood marketing association to market and give visibility and support to businesses in a neighborhood we just was Harlem Park to Park, Central Park, Marcus Garvey Park, Morningside Park, initially to 125th and 35th. We started with $5,000, so I think the role of government as a business incubator and accelerator is key. The government may not necessarily put up the building, but the government can support the growth of the business users. We started with $5,000 from the Department of Small Business Services. We started doing a Harlem Festival at 117th and St. Nick, where we set up tables and allowed small restaurants to allow you to taste their food for $5. And it ultimately, up till COVID, became such a large success that when Whole Foods was coming to the neighborhood, Whole Foods sat at the festival for 2 years, and we identified 19 small businesses that we worked with Harlem Community Development Corporation, EDC's Hot Bread Kitchen, Columbia University Small Business Center, and got those companies shovel-ready to be in Whole Foods when it's opened.
That's right.
The challenge has been that we have taken those companies from mom and pop producers to their kitchens, and now how many of those companies produce in Harlem? Almost none.
No, that's right.
So we have created another cycle of businesses, but we do not have the infrastructure to scale those businesses in the local market. So I'm actually doing a food hub now in the Bronx because there just isn't. I've tried for 4 or 5 years and cannot find a space to do it in Harlem. And so I think that the public sector needs to now, if it's not in the bricks and clicks, it needs to be in the business of being a Silicon Harlem and encouraging the growth and expansion of the operating businesses now that we have a stronger real estate infrastructure.
I'm going to say, so Harlem Community Development Corporation is a successor to Harlem Urban Development Corporation, which came online in 1971. So in 1995, we became Harlem Community Development Corporation. And you may have heard, Sean, in some of the earlier panels about the independence, autonomy of Harlem Urban Development Corporation, and that is absolutely true. Also, it was a different environment in terms of real estate along 125th Street in that, so we, Harlem CDC and ESD, so we own the Apollo, right? But we also own the Victoria, which is now a hotel, residential property, a cultural space that's managed and operated by the Apollo Theater Foundation. And a project that's actually dear to my wife's heart is, of course, the National Urban League, because now she has a Trader Joe's. Okay, but that's the reality. A lot of the real estate that we once had, we no longer have. Also, I have to point out that, and Beatrice, you know this well, there's a property across the street from the Apollo Theater that is not us, that is the city, and that, of course, is marked 125. There will be 2 iconic RFPs that will be released in 2025. One will be for Mark 125, the other will be for the Harlem African Burial Ground there at 126th Street and 2nd Avenue. So those are the 2 things to look for. Hopefully there will be, as I say, community involvement and engagement for the vision of those sites. But those are important sites to the overall redevelopment. You mentioned, Sean, of course, the Studio Museum.
Yes.
Another one that will be coming online, because one of the things that has been identified, and these are not my stats, but actually what used to be New York NYC and Company is now New York Conventions and Tourism, or something like that. The number 3 destination for all international tourism is Harlem, Northern Manhattan. So they're looking to actually capitalize on that, but also encouraging some ancillary uses such as restaurants and shops. But you're so right, Beatrice, in terms of national chains is all that you see right there. I would say that, and you pointed out some good stuff, but I would also say because a portion of 125th Street is the bid. And so, you know, if you're a landlord on the bid, you pay not only your regular real estate taxes, but you also pay a special assessment that goes into the bid coffers. And based on that, the rents that the tenants have to pay is going to be substantially more. And that's why typically along 125th Street, unless there's something I'm not seeing, you'll see mainly a national chains. There is, I'm going to give some props to the CC, who has 4 restaurants now, and now just opened up PB Brasserie, a steakhouse at 60 West. So we'll see how he does, but it's very challenging when the rents are too damn high like that, but we'll see.
Mark or Ken, you want to?
Well,
So the role of government, and again, we mentioned this because of Arch's history and their literal entanglement with government at just about every turn while they existed. And again, we're seeing this as we're talking about multinationals working directly. Curtis, you did mention, and I'll come back to this, that HCDC is no longer owner of a number of properties that.
No, we still own the real estate.
Right.
But we have long-term leases with the manager. For instance, the Apollo Theater Foundation, the Victoria. Of course, the developers are Danforth Development Partners, the Land Group, and also Exact Capital. Mm-hmm. All right, and then of course the National Urban League site that of course is Taconic, L&M, BRP.
Right. Management.
I was just going to say, when you look back at the ARC 60 and the fight about the state office building, mm-hmm. I mean, in some ways, I feel like we're in a good place in that, right? Like, the moment you're saying that a state office building is going to be on one of the most iconic commercial corridors is not a good moment, right? And so I think the notion that we can think about private owner-operators, hopefully minority owner-operators, local businesses, and how to support them, rather than thinking that, right, and I think that was a strategy in the 60s and 70s, mm-hmm. was, right, like move government offices, right,
sure.
Job creator to a certain extent.
The catalyst.
But to have something more grassroots and more beneficial, but I think, to your point about like, but if you don't do it right, then it does become national chains. You do get commercial displacement. And so that dilemma, I feel, has shifted a little bit, because I don't think the state wants to put more office buildings on 125th, so that's one win, but I think the other problems are, some like more complex, right? And about controlling the ground lease, for example, yes. Right? Or I'm thinking about community land trusts or other ways that we can have some notion of a regulatory agreement, or something that keeps it local.
Protects the asset.
Yeah.
Ken, I see you thinking there.
Could you restate the question?
So yes, absolutely. So I often refer to these coming out of the 70s and the 80s when the city was this close to declaring bankruptcy. Yeah. There was clearly a shortage of resources that could drive projects and even serve as catalysts. And so the shift to kind of neoliberal thinking that the market will have to fill in the gap here. And that persists today. There's subsidies and those sorts of things. And so I'm questioning the role of government, and we could speculate a little bit that January 20th, the role of government again might change. And so how do we prepare for this, and are we prepared for how this will impact markets, particularly a corridor like the historic 125th Street has some things in place, but how do we rethink how we invite the private market, if that's the model, or maybe institutions, maybe there are key industries like health sciences, and those sorts of things that become new anchors. Right? Most people understand the idea of an anchor as a commercial enterprise, your Target, your Whole Foods. But I'm starting to see across the country other anchors. Health sciences, there's the Spark Project in Lower Manhattan, sponsored by the governor. The numbers on that seem extraordinary in terms of all the things we talk about: education, jobs, entrepreneurship in terms of the sciences, and building, in this case, not a Silicon Alley, but a kind of health sciences alley, which I think is extraordinary. Could something like that become a model for Harlem's future, which is a little bit different than how it was assigned in rezoning in 2000?
Well, the framework, starting with the rezoning, and the framework for the rezoning in 2008 had to do with the Bloomberg administration's approach, which was to decentralize, if you will, mm-hmm. business districts across the city, such that each of the major boroughs could have business hubs
yes.
that generated both jobs and obviously tax revenue and activity, basically around transit hubs. 125th Street is one of those hubs. But the thinking also was, and this directly related to the UMES perspective, which I also occupied at that point, is that in order to revitalize 125th Street without uprooting the culture
Yes.
of 125th Street, was to have within the zoning framework a very strong emphasis for cultural institutions. So within the zoning text for 125th Street, there is, for any building that is 60,000 square feet or more, at least 5% must be devoted to culture, okay? Lois Vic is the example of that as well. The issue of commercial versus residential that Beatrice speaks to, I think was one that obviously was discussed back and forth, but the thinking was, it was difficult and continues to be difficult, I think, to attract private commercial development to 125th Street because in the mind of developers, there was no market for it, outside of social services. So even now, we haven't seen a private, purely commercial. I mean, the Urban League, of course, but the Urban League will have housing and other community assets. So that was the challenge. The thinking, however, was that in order to revitalize and bring more commerce into 125th Street, you needed more residents. So the zoning called for mixed-use development, okay? So, and then in the wake of 2008, there was the recession. So nothing happened really for the better part of 15 years, with the exception of the big retail complex there where Whole Foods is.
Yes.
But, other than that, and I know when we were at UMES, there were proposals after proposals about a hotel and residence and mixed-use development, but none of it could ever really take hold. So, ideally, we would have liked to have seen more commercial development, I think, but the reality is that required a private sector investment that really has never come to the fore.
Yeah, I remember, and you'll have to help me with the date here, because I remember it being talked about a lot in the community that Magic Johnson and his team came in. And this was almost going to be a test case. I see Curtis getting ready.
And there was an athlete, but it wasn't Magic Johnson.
Yes,
it was
the name is
Emmitt
fronted.
Smith.
Yes.
Yeah,
E. Smith Levis. And they were
Smith.
looking at doing a hotel, a Hyatt place. And so I actually gave them the demand analysis from HVS to, and they had actually a lunch over at Red Rooster with Steve Williams. But they came out of that meeting and decided that they were going to approach Jeff Sutton of Wharton Properties and try to do one right there where the Whole Foods site is now.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, this is a great segue into my next question, because we've talked a lot about community self-determination and Arch's willingness to kind of engage as a community representative in translating those desires and that self-determination. We know that Arch has presented quite a few plans. I won't call them failed plans, although many people see it as that. Sometimes even communities are like, they have planning fatigue because so many ideas are put forth, but they don't become realized. But I wonder if the panel could take on this idea that these often derided failed plans and their related vision plans, proposals, studies, demand analysis, all appear to be a critical part of how you go about advancing a community's interest. This comprised much of Arch's work. So maybe some of you could share some of your experience on these thoughts. I mean, well before the rezoning, there were studies at the study. Just a note on what I believe to be the Bloomberg's administration's, an administration from that top-down perspective seems to be incredibly important in terms of how the agencies move, right? And as I look at it today, this global market, we hear about this all the time, and trying to ensure in this idea of decentralized business hubs, right? You want them all to be participating in the market, right? And if it seems like New York City has been deemed a particular geography with a primary function of the city that is to participate in this reproduction of capital, right? Figure out a way to bring money into the city, move that money around, particularly locally, if it can be managed, right? So there's the quandary with the multinationals. That money is coming in, but it may not be going too far out as opposed to back into the community. So in those two scenarios, one, the premise that this is the context, the city is expected to reproduce capital, and key commercial corridors are expected to do that. And then the idea of how do you vision this in that context? What is the value of these studies and plans, and how important are they? Do we need to be doing more? Do we need to do them faster? Do we need to stay ahead of what the market is? Because the market's got a treasure trove of tools that are kicking out ideas and pro formas. By the time I finish this sentence, someone's already run about 5 or 6 of those. So maybe you could take that on and guide us. I mean, what's the value in this market, if any?
I mean, maybe this is a plug for a multidisciplinary team, because I think, and I've been on these planning processes where you have a planner, a landscape architect, but you don't typically have a developer or an investor in the team. Mm-hmm. And so, you see these plans, and all credit to Art.
Sure, absolutely.
But when you have a plan that says housing, community, commercial, but it's not necessarily vetted. Like, so for example, even just a commercial lease, right? So probably going to be 7 to 10 years, right? You're going to have a credit tenant. If you're going to get a loan, then the lender's going to want the building, 30 to 50% pre-leased. That lends itself to a national retailer, not a local business, right? And so you can make the local retail work, but before you put it on a plan and tell the community that, you should make sure that you can make it work. And I think a lot of times we have plans that look great, but they're not necessarily vetted for sort of the demand study, what tenants have to do to get into that lease, who pays the tenant, like all of those kind of larger issues. Sometimes we'll just upend a plan, or even just timing, right? Like, because when you see the whole rendering, it looks like, oh, okay, well, next week, 125th Street will be completely different, when it might be a 20-year process.
Right. The question always is, what's financeable?
Yes.
And how do you get capital to do it? So, that's where some solemn truths come in. And, whether or not a particular use and the developer for it can garner financing. I mean, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And rents on 125th Street, the rezoning did not drive rents up. I mean, when I got to UMass in 03, retail rents along 125th Street were approaching $100 a square foot.
And didn't that have something to do with the president number 43? Was it Clinton who, when he came with such pomp and circumstance to 125th Street?
Well, that's interesting, because that decision is somewhat akin to the state office building. See, Rockefeller, in the wake of the assassination of Dr. King, the thinking was, well, if the private sector is not going to invest in Harlem, we, the public sector, will. And if we bring a state office building here and create a presence here, then that will
That's the
be a
signal.
value statement about Harlem. Many years later, and Congressman Rangel actually wanted Bill Clinton to come here. Bill Clinton had a lease in Manhattan, but he was getting flack in government because supposedly it was too high. So Charlie said, "Come up here," and he took him to 55 West, and he's still there. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't know, at the end of the day, but again, it's private office space, and 55 West is really one of the only pure commercial office buildings on 125th Street, because it's, at the end of the day, it's been difficult to attract private sector investment up here. 125th Street and Park Avenue, that the Durst now have put on the market. There have been several
Countless.
visions about 125th Street.
Rondo,
Some of them have been, first it was Major League Baseball was going to be the anchor tenant in there with commercial office space. These things don't tend to materialize. I don't. It's not racism; it's capitalism.
Sure.
At the end of the day.
Sure, but it seems like, in the past two sessions, the distinction between kind of reactive and a proactive stance.
Yeah.
That, sure, and again, Arch responding to, as opposed to ahead of in a kind of preemptive position, to get to the sites, target them, knowing what might be coming, and start to message ahead of time. And I think there's models of this, right? The Olympic Village in Williamsburg, right, threw up images of what Williamsburg could look like. Developers paid attention, even though we never got the Olympics. The High Line, right? Really good example of an idea that over time percolated and then gained traction.
And Long Island City as well.
Exactly. And so, and Hudson Yards is going to come up later. I got that one from Mark. But sure, yes, absolutely.
So the issue, I think, in financeability is also an issue of scale. So one of the projects that scratching my brain when we were on the community board was championed by Tom Lunkey of the Harlem Community Development Corporation, was the Harlem version of the High Line, which would have been, which was Marquetta Mile, which is creating a public space and public market under the Metro North Viaduct. He fought for that project with his heart and soul. We supported him on the community board as much as possible. I think we have to look at projects that allow companies to scale, because you're right, Ken, we're not going to get a Fortune 500 company, but I think the question is, how do we build within Harlem our own Fortune 100 companies? And I think the point should not be lost that one of the now largest black-owned companies in the country, Shea Moisture, started from a stand on 125th Street.
We gave them a loan.
Say no more. Say no more.
Mic drop.
Yes, mic drop. Yes, indeed. So you started to unpack, and I think this is incredibly important given the scale of 125th Street, the viability of financing these projects and the awareness on both sides that some ideas have been floated. I think the New York Times did a wonderful piece and revealing to the entire city the incredibly complex and detailed financing around Hudson Yards, right? Rather creative, I'll say, as well, right? And the transportation infrastructure financing that was used, EB-5 visa funds for foreigners, 421A, of course, Larry Silverstein's involvement in pushing some of these to ensure that some of this could happen. So I wonder if if the panel can talk about or share any insights into how these financing mechanisms could be leveraged on behalf of 125th Street. Like, where's the creativity that we see starting to emerge in some of these other developments? How can we apply that to 125th Street?
So I'm going to have to raise my hand and lobby. And re-lobby.
Okay.
So one of the things that we don't actually have enough of is a different kind of planning.
Different kind of what?
Planning,
Plan.
financial planning. Right, so as a small developer, there used to be a time when I wanted information on the Harlem market from a spending perspective. There was a nonprofit called Veritas or Clark that used to produce the Harlem drill down of emerging central business districts in black and brown neighborhoods. They no longer do that. So as a developer, I do not have access to the information that Whole Foods has, that Target has, and Trader Joe's has. It's expensive, but it's available. It would be so amazing to allow local development if agencies regularly provided that data, regularly paid HVS, the $10,000, $20,000 a year, to update the hospitality demand studies.
Okay.
Regularly,
I do hear you and receive.
regularly do investor road trips to countries like Brazil, like Colombia, that are comfortable with communities of color, and market EB5, and pay for example, for the market studies that are required for EB5 financing, and allow developers just to basically borrow the study so that every developer doesn't have to go and spend $35,000, $40,000, but create effectively a data archive that allows local developers to show up looking really smart with current data produced by the leading analysts in the marketplace by product types.
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
That's extraordinary. I mean, this is precisely, I think, how we move to, I think, is an unstated promise of this greater distribution of capital that we're all hoping for that can trickle down. I try to avoid the idea of trickle-down economics. I want to make sure I'm not conflating the two here. But this greater distribution can only happen through those types of means. So I really appreciate your answer on that. Anybody else want to take this on?
I definitely want to just state, and I definitely hear you, Beatrice. As you know, Harlem CDC, we went through a reorg in 2014, where we went from 4 departments to 3. One of the casualties is I lost one of my intellectual property to that, of course, being Wayne Benjamin. Tom Monty retired, and planning was decimated, done away with. But I hear you. So 2 things that occurred during Columbia's expansion in what we call West Harlem and Manhattanville. There was the capitalization of Harlem CDC to the tune of $20 million over a 24-year period. Right? So kind of small stuff. But the other thing was the creation of a nonprofit organization, community development, called West Harlem Development Corporation, capitalized to the tune of $76 million over a 16-year period, so more substantial. But their catchment area, remember, it's Community Board 9. But having said that, in the language that we wrote out by my board and everything, was that planning studies and everything those funds could be used for those types of activities. So we will talk when this concludes. But you're absolutely right. That is valuable because once the real estate partners came and saw that HVS study, that was like gold to them. And they made the decision that they would go forward with their plan. So absolutely, that type of intellectual property is important to not only community-based organizations, but also developers.
I think, at this point, over the past 3 decades, a lot has happened on 125th Street. Certainly there are those who disagree, but I think 125th Street as the anchor of black culture, I think has largely been accomplished. I mean, between NBT, National Black Theater, Studio Museum, the renovation and expansion of the Apollo, Loews Vic, you know, how many years did we hear, you know,
Yes.
We got to go downtown because we don't have a hotel up
Yes.
there. So now we have a hotel, you know. I think the question becomes, and then the Urban League, right? Historic black organization now resides in Harlem.
Right.
So I think if you go back 50 years and you were to tell people what 125th Street looks like now, they would think you were crazy, right? So what do we want to do with this? I mean, affordable housing is an ongoing need in this city, but it's not going to be solved on 125th Street.
No.
But I think we need to maybe crystallize at this point, you know, what is it still lacking that we want, and where is the opportunity to pursue those aspirations, and what is it going to take to bring it about?
That's a great point. I mean, maybe we can open this up for questions around that, because we did start with the idea that 125th Street is the heart and soul of the community. Given its slow but steady integration into the global economy, is it still possible, and are there ways that we need to be visioning how we maintain that cultural disposition, that soul of that street?
You know, I want to offer another little anecdote, but I'm hobbled because I don't remember his name, because it goes back 50 years. 55 West 125th Street was developed by a black man.
Yeah, that's true.
If anybody in the audience knows his name,
We're going to find out.
Charles
Google.
Vincent.
Charles Vincent, C.A.V. C.A.V. He had a restaurant up there.
Right on top, yeah.
You know, so,
Wow.
and that's interesting because that's 50 years later, that's still the only, you know, real purely commercial office space in the corridor. But I just say that to say that we have had a role in the evolution of 125th Street. It has not been imposed upon us, you know, necessarily. There have been capital constraints.
Yes.
Because Charlie Vincent was the only likely. I mean, there's been spots where we, black folk, owned properties on 125th Street, but it was by no means pervasive. Okay, but you know, we have played a pivotal role in the evolution of 125th Street, and the question is, you know, here we are now with, I think, major accomplishments. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, great. So we have time for audience questions. It's been really stimulating. I think it's going to continue. We've had some time to digest. So do we have any questions from the audience? Let's see what we hear. Barely see.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentations. My name is Tiana Cooksey, and I work at the intersection of architecture and planning. So I've learned a lot of great insights, and something that you mentioned about understanding how to access information so that you can be ahead of the game and maybe figure out more creative ways to either finance or save time. That's what I'm really interested in. So could you be more specific about, in your work, where you can see opportunities for what types of information specifically? Like, would you like to know more about land acquisition that is available but maybe not on the market? Would you like to understand more about how you could leverage financial incentives using precedents from around the world, like what exactly could these databases look like?
If that question is addressed to me?
Yes.
No problem. So I also teach at the other school. So when you look at industry information, right, there are certain key data sets. A lot of them are census driven. And there are people that if you as an individual try to grind out information for a particular neighborhood, it's very involved. So if you want to build a data set for Harlem, there is no city called Harlem. It is an accumulation of zip codes. So then you have to go into these data rooms and pull the data by zip codes and create studies by zip codes. You know, I'm a liberal arts girl, you know, not a data scientist. For a data scientist, that's not so hard, right? So it's literally creating data science sets that people can use. Whole Foods does not go into a neighborhood without running that analysis. And without running that analysis on a daily basis to decide the product mix that should be in the store. We are playing checkers, they are playing chess. Fortunately, we live in a relatively data democratic country, right? If someone with a little ka-ching wanted to just pay for that data and make it public, then we would be playing on a level playing field with players such as Whole Foods, and understanding what are the gaps, what are the products that are being bought in our community with increasing velocity, decreasing of velocity, et cetera. And we as a community, when we have community meetings, when we have economic development committees at community boards, that is the level I think those conversations should be had at, instead of we don't have enough. Take a look at the demand and build product based on proven demand, and when you do that and go to the bank, that's when you get financing.
I also think, as an urban planner, that's to me the state of the art, the next phase of how we should be teaching urban planning. And we at the other school have we have professors now that have these companies, right, Fifth Wall, Property Scout, et cetera, that are using AI to scrape data from existing databases that can do some of that stuff. But you know, to your point, it costs money.
Well,
subscriptions.
I'm going to make a plug for this school. So, I mean, this is precisely why this panel has been formed, because the Bond Center, one of our key tenets is utilizing data to advance our interest in the research that we do. So I'm really proud. And they've been flashing on the screen earlier, but JP Morgan partnered with us, provided us their consumer spending data, 2 million unique data points across the city, of which we drilled down by zip code and tell the story of small business impact from COVID to 2023. And then that raised a number of questions about how do you define small business? As of 2023, New York City released data that there had been a massive uptick in the registration of small businesses. However, when you look under the hood, those small businesses are single proprietor, and the address of the business was also their home. Right? So when you look out in the street and you see all the store vacancies, there's a number of things happening. There's e-commerce, which is a behemoth, a force to be reckoned with. The capital required to open up a restaurant, which is the experience economy, which is what we live in now. Right? We're no longer selling goods and services at the same rate that we used to. So the clothing store and those sorts of things, the hardware store, have all sort of vanished in many instances and simply can't compete. So I often ask elected officials, what do you mean by small business? And where is that small business expected to exist? And so I agree, I think we need to be training the next generation in this medium of data to understand, and to your, I love how you describe it, we are playing checkers, and they are playing chess. And we really need to catch up, particularly as a community. So the idea of democratizing data is happening here at City College, at the Bond Center, at Spitzer. So we're proud to be able to at least be on your side in awareness in that regard. Curtis.
So Sean, I was definitely going to just say that Harlem CDC, we try to see ourselves as a one-stop shop, especially for the small business person. So we have a series of webinars and that we actually do. We used to do them in person right there at the Harlem State office, but I think you attended a few of them. But now since COVID, we've gone virtual and it's wonderful. All you need is a computer. You can log on and get the content right there. We partner with, of course, the Harlem Business Alliance, New York Women's Chamber of Commerce, Start Small, Think Big, SCORE, NYC, you name it. Also, I got to give major props because remember, my board is comprised of all of the electeds who govern Northern Manhattan. So I want to give a major shout out to my assembly person right there, Jordan Wright. Yes. And he has been instrumental in making sure that that we address the MWBE shortage. So if you are a women and/or minority-owned business, we can get you certified to do business with the state of New York for nothing, for free. These are your tax dollars at work. Please take advantage of that. In addition, we have a grant program, which I tried to mention earlier, that supports nonprofits within our catchment area, which is 96th Street going north on the island of Manhattan. And Sean, I see you about to cut me off. Go ahead.
No, there was one more question here,
yes.
And then we might need to. I'm going to make an introduction to our esteemed visitor here, Mr. Jordan Wright. But we have one more question from the audience.
Hi, thank you so much for, everything today has been so interesting. This panel in particular, I feel like I'm just being stretched to the limit of understanding different acronyms. But I'm trying to get there. So I was born in 2001. So I don't know what Harlem was like in any period of time, pre the rezoning of 125th Street. And I think of 125th Street when I think of Harlem, really. So I think of the 1980s, the 1930s, whatever year it might be, it's on the same plateau for me because I have no reference to those different time periods. So when I see pictures like the one we have in this slideshow of a time period that looks like it took place within the Harlem Renaissance, there's an incredible diversity of different businesses. You have like light manufacturing and all the different beautiful performing arts venues that were associated with the Harlem Renaissance. I'm troubled because I don't know what Harlem was like in the 80s. I feel like I'm ignorant to it, but still I strive to understand like how we can return to like a really healthy economy that actually works for people, instead of these multinational corporations that have kind of taken over 125th Street. And, in those pictures of the Harlem Renaissance, all of the organizations we're talking about, these development corporations, to my knowledge, they didn't exist. And like in that picture right there. It went away. Not that picture. Not that one. So, I'm just wondering, like, I'm just struggling to understand, where is the role of planning? It's planning, does it actually have the ability to be transformative?
That's a great question.
Yes. So I actually put up that slide, anticipating your question a little bit, because we use the word neoliberal quite a bit, and then I think the title of the panel is Return or out of the private sector, but that's what Harlem was, right? Right, you had incredible population growth, not just of Harlem, but of New York City in that era, that drove all sorts of demand from the private sector to open theaters and restaurants and other things. And sometimes I feel like planning can be very reactive. So planning comes in when something goes wrong, right? So like what happens when the population flow, right? New York City lost almost 1 million people in the 70s and early 80s. So what do you do about that, right? You bring in the planners and they try to figure it out. And I think neighborhoods can sometimes regenerate, but it takes all sorts of different factors if you don't have the kinds of incredible amounts of population growth that you had in the 30s the 40s. So it's a little bit tough, right? And those pictures are super nostalgic, right? It's like, also it's like, not many people are going to the butcher and the baker and getting a button sewed, you know, like, so we also have to realize that, like, that condition doesn't match the way we live.
Mark, if I would just add one thing, an elephant, what I think is I'm surprised it hasn't come up, is the issue of racism and redlining, right? So one of the consequences of racism and redlining is Harlem's 125th Street was vibrant because that's the only place the community could shop.
Yeah.
Right? And so sometimes there are people who argue that integration was actually bad for black business. And I think that's a point that deserves to be considered. And one of the reasons that in my work I'm so passionate about small businesses is we have to build up our own business base. And we have to not do it out of force, we have to do it out of commitment, right? We have to commit to buy products from people in our communities, and that's why we need the data so that we can help our businesses meet that demand. But I think we have to impose on ourselves that discipline of increasing the velocity with which, the amount of times dollars stay in our community, because now the African American community is one of the lowest in the United States. Every other community spends more within its community than we do.
So I want to give an opportunity to Assemblyman Wright, if you'd like to say a few words, and then.
Thank you, everyone. It means a lot for me to be in this room right now. If my history is correct, I think my grandmother actually used to work for Mr. J. Max Bond, so it means a lot for me to be in this room right now. I just want to say thank you to everyone in this room. It means a lot for me to be here in terms of understanding the future of 125th Street. I'm a real child of Harlem. I grew up with my father working at the State Office Building, and right across the street, my mother worked at the Studio Museum in Harlem. So when I got sick of one, I'd go see the other. When one got sick of me, I'd go see the other. Someone didn't want to buy me lunch, went to the other side. Curtis understands this. So in all seriousness, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone. Thank you so much to the folks at Arch. I want to thank the Bond Center Director, Sean Rickenbacker, Dean Gutman as well. Again, folks like this will always have a space in my office in the assembly to come, say hello, bounce ideas off me, I bounce ideas off you, because we all have one thing in mind, and that's the great future of Harlem, 125th Street, and the great state of New York beyond. So thank you so much. Appreciate the time.